Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Heppner, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Historical Society, and we're so happy to welcome you here today. One of my jobs for many years, I've been involved with the Historical Society for about 20 years, and one of my jobs that I somehow unofficially became the mistress of our art collection. I have personally been involved with moving it about 5 times, and we're all very excited about about what will be happening in the next upcoming year when our art collection will be moving to our new building, which is located right up the hill there, and it will finally have a permanent home. But for me, I grew up in Woodstock, and one of the biggest surprises I had when I started working with the art collection was the number of incredible women artists, and that I had no idea. Some of them I knew them as my friends' grandparents, my friends' mothers. I just did not know for such a small town, the percentage of talented, spirited women who brought so much to the creativity of the Woodstock art community really existed here. Our collection really has just some wonderful work by many women who have sort of been forgotten a little bit. Mm-hmm. So we're here today to really celebrate all 50 of these women, and we have 4 other women who each have had a different kind of relationship with one of the artists, and in some cases, many of the artists in this room. So we'd like to start today with Melinda Rohland Meister. She is the great niece of Paul Rohland and Carolyn Spear, and has been on quite an adventure for the past several years, quite a few years, learning about her aunt and uncle, and in particular, her aunt.
Do you want me to talk? Yeah.
I would like to.
Well, I started many years ago when very little information was available, and I didn't have much time. But I have to say that COVID was a great friend because it forced me to pull together the information I had. A lot of the material online in Ask Art was incorrect, and I was trying to correct that, and then I got involved, and I was encouraged by Bruce Weber and Avis Berman to do something more substantial. I did monographs of each of the artists, Paul and Caroline, because I figured a book wasn't really worth it and too expensive, really. And their work really belongs in, the information on them really belongs in the museums which house their work, like the Historical Society. So that was what I did, but as far as Caroline is concerned, she was a very interesting person. She was from Boston. She never lost that Boston air about her. I see that in the letters to the Kramers that she wrote. They were great friends. The Rolands and the Kramers were probably the closest, and then Nan Mason and Wilma Hervey were also. Those were that was a tight bunch, and they kept in touch with each other over the years. But anyway, I see in her letters to Florence that she had this high tone of voice that could only have come from someone who lived and was raised in Boston. So I entitled her a Bostonian maverick. I have to say, and most recently, she was mentioned in a 2005 book by Blake Gopnik, who wrote well, it's kind of a biography of the Barnes and of Mr. Barnes, and she is mentioned in that book along with her husband. So she is continuing to be a person of note, in my opinion. Since her death, she's been included in 9 posthumous exhibitions, one of them this one, which I think is extraordinary for a woman artist of little note, basically speaking. She's not Georgia O'Keeffe. Only half of her works have surfaced, either because she destroyed them or because she used the pastels. She worked mainly in pastels. She used the pastels then to make lithographs and decided to pitch the paper. I don't know, but I've only accounted for 1/2 of the works that have been listed in the catalog, which I did create using, when you create a catalog, you use any bit of information you can find about a person. At least that's how I did it. Her 30-year marriage to Paul Roland was a very tight one. She never recovered from his death. He died of asthma. He was a severe asthmatic, and she kept him going for all those years. They were an interesting couple. She was about 2 inches taller than he. He was a tiny little man, and she was a rather robust woman, but they made a wonderful pair together and created together. And finally, I wanted to say her work on Black subjects was very interesting, and she continued to use this as she felt a great deal of sympathy for Black people, and that was what she really tried to create. So that is the majority of her work, like the Cotton Pickers, is focused on Black life in the South. Okay, that's it.
Excellent. I wanted to ask you, we had talked a little bit, we talked about how she, drove across country.
Yes.
And just I'm really taken when I looked at some of the material Bruce wrote about these women in a very early, how they just took off, how they traveled to Europe, they traveled around the countryside, they were real spirits of adventure.
Right, it must have been, they would travel, they would stay it was $1.20 night, $1.25 a night to stay in a camp. And these were very primitive machines, and she drove once with her husband across and then came back alone and then went out again in the car. She was intrepid, really. But George O'Keeffe did that too. Yeah.
Thank you. Our second panelist is Karen King.
Hi.
Karen had I'm trying to think, the great granddaughter by marriage. Is that correct? Of Florence Cromer. Karen had the wonderful experience of growing up somewhere else, and then has moved to Woodstock with her husband, and has become sort of immersed in that she lives in the house where that Florence Cromer created and lived in, and had her family. A home that has in a really nice way, has been able to stay in your family for many generations.
About 100 years.
100 years. Although I've met your sons, I'm not sure. Maybe you never could tell.
That's true.
They might be there.
I wish they were here so they could, find out more information and maybe they'd stay.
So Karen, although she never obviously had an opportunity to meet Florence, but she has been able to read her diary and gather lots of information. So she's going to share with us what that was like.
Yeah, so my name's Karen King, and I'm happy to be here. Bruce Weber encouraged me to, not necessarily write, but, actually he has encouraged me to write, but to be here because of Florence. And thanks to the Historical Society for inviting me to be on the panel. So I also serve on the Historical Society's Advisory Council. So, and my husband Jason, raise your hand, Jason. He's the great grandson of Florence Bowen Cromer and Conrad Cromer. So I'm just going to read a bit. So years ago, I learned that he was an artist, that she was an artist, and that Conrad as well. But I learned a lot more about her when her youngest daughter, Eileen Bowen Cromer, died. And she left an estate which had lots of art, memorabilia, all sorts of things. And one of the main things that she had was Florence's diaries. And Florence kept a diary from the age of 13 in 1897, basically until she died in 1962 at the age of 78. So the diaries provide a really detailed account of her life in New York. She was born in Brooklyn. So her life in New York City, her life in Europe, that's where she met her husband, in Woodstock and other places. So in 2018, Jason was up here, he found a cache of letters, photos that also belong to the Florence and Conrad, the letters from all sorts of different artists, all sorts of family members. Most of this information, a lot of information, was donated to the Archives of American Art in, I think, 1965 and 1975. Her daughters donated a lot of it. I believe it's like over 13,000 images that are, there's a 33-page finding aid of the stuff that's donated, so it's a lot. But the main, one of the amazing things, I do a lot of genealogy, and one of the really amazing things is that for all these pictures, there were like names, you know, from the 1800, just the names of people. So Jason and his sister donated a lot of stuff to the Historical Society. We have it, I built a, use the information to build a family tree. Let's see, okay, and then in 2019, when Jason's step-grandfather passed away, there was more stuff. There was more memorabilia. And Jason and his sister Sarah enlisted the help of Tom Wolfe, who's an art historian, and Jim Cox, kind of to figure out what to do with things. So Tom suggested that we donate the diaries to the Archives of American Art, which we will, the originals. Some of the diaries were transcribed, and those were donated to the Historical Society. So if you ever want to know about Woodstock and the area from pretty much from 1906 to like 1962, the information's there. So, and one of the things, so most of the information I have comes from family stories and their diaries. And then recently somebody asked me how I felt about reading her diaries. And I was just kind of like, and I thought about it, and I feel like she left it for people to read. And then the sentiment was confirmed when I found in her diaries, it says, all of my diaries and letters I wish to have kept for a new generation, as I feel in this way they will know something of the life out of which they sprung. Some of these letters are from people whose fame may be international someday. And then that was one draft of it. And then there was another, it says basically the same thing. I should like to have my diaries kept and letters from people of unusual interest I have known and had notes from many. Someday, when these people have achieved renown, what little my words and their own letter may add to the knowledge of their lives may be of value to others. So I look forward to sharing information about Florence Ballin Cromer. It's lovely. Just lovely.
Yeah, they're in that you live in their house.
Oh.
That was there. They have lots of little. They're like, and it really has remained. There have been some renovations,
Yes.
but you still, when you go in the house, little pieces that the Cromers did that they did themselves. I think creativity in the house. Their artworks around you, artwork of their friends. And you've sort of had to explore all that since you moved there. You said just in discovering who all these people were, and wasn't there like a dish that you found? And
There's all sorts of.
It turned out that it was made by Carl Walters.
Yes, actually, it's a bowl that Carl Walters did, and it says Florence on the inside. But there's all sorts of things in the house, glassware, and actually, she did a diary in 1923, and one of the things. That's the first year they were in the farm, and she writes about it. And she used to recondition furniture and sell it, but she writes about this cabinet, and they, painted the inside robin egg blue, and then basically they sat and admired the pretty things inside. And if that cabinet is still in the house, it's robin egg blue, and there's still all the pretty things inside. So a lot of things like that. You pick up a book, there'll be like a picture of somebody, like, who's that? Or a letter. There's a letter from there's a book in the house. Open it up. There's a letter from, I guess she was really good friends with. Is it Ely Nadelman? Actually, it was his wife, Nadelman, the sculptor. So a lot of it keeps giving, and then sometimes even people in the community. I was thinking, Sharon Fletcher. The other day, we found some lithographs. This is for Conrad. So lithographs, Bruce had asked about lithographs. We didn't know about it. Lithographs, and then there were some batiks. And then there's just things kind of come to us sometimes. So it's like, it's very interesting.
I think it's really interesting in the homes that people lived in, because many of them moved here, sometimes from urban areas or from very different parts of the country, and they purchased these homes or pieces of property or barns or whatever, and then they turned them into these really interesting, creative. Someone said, "What's Woodstock architecture?" Well, I think it can be anything. It can be houses that began as a shed are now these wonderful, sprawling homes with often, especially at that time, beautiful vistas of the mountains. I think, unfortunately, we lost some of those vistas with all the trees, but not at your house. Their house. From behind, you will really understand why they loved living there, because their view of the mountain was unbelievable.
Absolutely, yeah. So, as Jason says, it's a magical place.
I think he's and just as an aside, the first meeting of the Historical Society of Woodstock
that's true.
took place in the Crommers' living room. So beyond their desire to really be part of the Woodstock community and to help save that information for all of us was really strong. So and the fact that their children their descendants are still here.
That's true.
So obviously, the Woodstock really became dear to their heart.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now we're going to move on a little bit from the researchers to the actual livers and people who lived right in the midst of Woodstock artist community. Jenne Currie is here. Both her parents were artists. Her mom, Ethel, and I really meant, well, you'll have to do a little exploration when it's over, but clearly all these women are represented in our exhibition. Jenny's parents, Ethel Magafan and Bruce Currie, and Jenne also gets to live in the house of her childhood, but she really grew. Were you born in Kings? Were you born here, actually?
Yes.
Yes. So she is a Woodstocker, true and true, and also really was a real observer of the and liver of the Woodstock arts community.
Yeah,
So.
definitely. Yes.
And she grew up down the street from me.
I think we were on the same school
Yes.
bus, but anyway, let's not divert
Don't
too
digress.
early on in the game. Even though I know this panel is about Woodstock artists, my mom had a pretty significant professional life before she came to Woodstock. She came here at age 30, and believe it or not, she had a substantial professional career before she got to Woodstock. So I think it's kind of interesting, so I'm going to backtrack. She started out, grew up in Colorado Springs. She and her identical twin sister, Jenne Magafan, they were both artists. And so they were raised by two very poor immigrant parents, a Polish mother and a Greek father. And the first remarkable thing about them is that there is, of course, like with any immigrant family, they were struggling and just trying to keep their heads above water. There was no culture whatsoever in their childhood, but they both started out from, like, say, age 7 going, "We want to be artists." What? Where did that come from? And they did. Those little kids, they were doing poster competitions and pictures in the Denver Post. We want to, it's like, whoa, like right out of the gate. And so their first amazing break is in high school in Denver. And the two girls are in their art school, and there's a guest artist who comes in for the day. And he is Frank Mayshow, who was a very prominent muralist at the time. And he's just visiting, guest artist. And he's walking around the room, and he sees these two girls who are just like light years ahead of everybody else in terms of talent. And he talks with them, and over the years, as they finish high school, he gets to know them. And when they graduate from high school, he invites them and their other classmate, equally talented, another immigrant kid, Edward Chavez, who ends up becoming my uncle because he ends up marrying Jenny. So there are these 3 dynamo kids in this high school class. And so he said, when you guys graduate high school, I'm going to invite you to live with me and my family up in Redstone, Colorado, in the middle of the winter, the entire winter, to assist him on a mural he was working on, because he was just cranking out murals left and right, and the mural process was incredibly complicated with all these different phases. And so the 3 of them just jump at the idea, and so they spend several months up there living with Frank Mayshow and his wife and his pile of kids, and they learn every single aspect of mural making, which is just unbelievably involved. And so they're getting this, they're apprentices, they're, sweeping the floor and all sorts of stuff, babysitting and learning mural making and getting a real education, a rounded education in that, they were part of the family for that winter. They were learning about Mozart and Dostoevsky and, these kids didn't know anything about culture, and he just gave them this intensive course in just about everything in the course of a few months over a very snowy winter in the high Rockies. And at the end of that time, we're now in the 1930s. The FDR New Deal project is in full swing, called the WPA. He said to the guys, Ethel, Jenny, and Ed, you've got the, intellectually, you know how to do all these ABC steps. There's a ton of funding out there for murals right now. You guys can do this. You know how to do it. And he pushes them, really wisely. He doesn't keep them like, oh, be my slaves for the rest of my life. He says, go get these, compete for these murals. And they do, and they start winning, especially Jenny and Ethel, start winning mural competitions. So before they're 30 years old, between the two of them, they win 10 different mural competitions around the United States. They're in their 20s. It's like, whoa, talk about an act to follow, right? So just to fast forward, towards the end of the Second World War, they end up in LA. They're bouncing around out west a lot during the war years. And in LA, they hook up with, as artists always do, a group of other artists. Some of them are a little bit older. Arnold Blanche and Fletcher Martin are out there in LA in the 1940s during the war. And they all get to be friends, and they say to these younger girls, if you're serious about being professionals, which you obviously are, you can't be in this backwater of LA. The only culture, sounds weird, right? It's a city, but there's no culture in the 40s in the United States except in New York City. That's it. They said, if you want to be serious artists, you got to be near New York City. And they go, New York City? Ugh, we're country kids. He said, well, there's this cool little community that's within a day's trip, and it's called Woodstock, New York. And so talk about station wagons and driving cross country. These two guys convinced the girls to pack up their station wagon and their art supplies and their dogs and their paintings, and I don't know. And they drive from LA to Woodstock. And that's how they ended up here. End of chapter 1.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's, I wonder what it is about Woodstock it's small. It's a little town, so little. I mean, even now, it's only about 6,000 people. But proportionately, the number of people with either who are artists, want to be artists, feel creative, have ended, like that story. They've ended up, when you think of the whole country, a lot of different other art colonies around the country, but something about Woodstock. I mean, the New York City piece is important.
It's always been important.
But something, they left those big mountains for our little hills.
She made us go, poor us. We had to go to Colorado every summer because she missed those huge mountains so much. So that was part of my upbringing, was more cross-country road trips to go see the Rockies and be out there because she was so homesick for them. I won't tell you what she said about the Catskills. It was a little disparaging. Those aren't mountains.
We've heard it. Yeah, we have a few comebacks, but for another discussion.
Yeah.
And then she met your father here?
Yeah, so after the war, Ethel and Jenny get here right after the war, and my dad is in the service. He gets released from the service, and he hears talk about connections. He's down in New York City, which is where he was before the war, so he just went back to where he'd been, and once again knew other artists. Raoul Haig was an artist he knew down in the city, and Raoul said, hey, don't you want to, Woodstock's this cool little community. There are these two beautiful young women who just blew in from the West. One of them's married, but the other one isn't. My dad came to Woodstock for the first time to check out my mom for one of the big Woodstock parties. He did, and he was smitten. She wasn't so much, but that's a long story. So he was love at first sight, and he ended up moving up here, and he eventually convinced her to get married to him. And then it went on from there. I don't know if you want other people to.
Yes, but what is interesting, all three, I mean, these are, I know we did an exhibit, the students from Bard did an exhibit a number of years ago of artist couples, but it is really fascinating how, I mean, that these couples all stayed married here quite a while, and they continued to work and raise their families and in this little town, and had friends who had the same story.
Yeah, and like you said, it's interesting that a lot of communities would have an art colony for a little while and then it would disperse, but this is like generation after, the early 1900s, just some of the historians call them waves, like the first wave and then the second and the third, the post-World War II, that was my parents' wave with so many other people, and it keeps happening. And like I think I said to you the other day, there are friends I have who just moved to this town, 10, 15 years ago, and they felt like misfits growing up in Wisconsin or wherever, and then they come to Woodstock and they go, oh, this is where I belong. And it's really sweet. It's like there's something so, whatever the word is for what Woodstock is to a lot of people.
It's like that thing that you can buy in the souvenir shops, I belong here. It just took me a while to find it.
Yeah.
To find
Yeah,
Woodstock.
that's it
I think
in
a
a
lot of
nutshell.
people feel that way.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Well, and speaking of people who sort of wandered here, and I don't know, and you came here, did you come here in 1966, is that right?
6666.
See, I read Bruce's book. This is Paula Nelson, who really, I mean, you've really, an artist herself in her own right, but you have been involved in Woodstock art community on so many different levels since you arrived, from babysitter of their children to friends, to workers, to co-workers, and some became very good friends.
Well, I guess first I want to say thank you to Bruce Weber, and I'm sorry that he isn't here today, and he promised he would come and heckle me.
I'll heckle you
I think he
instead.
has
Okay,
the
you
flu.
can
We're
do
not
it.
exactly sure, but he was concerned enough that he really didn't want to be here and expose.
So he brought us all together.
He did.
And thank you to the Historical Society, which is my favorite not-for-profit, because nobody gets paid here. I mean, it's all volunteer, so that is really something for this place of Woodstock. But in reply to what you had to say, I think the Art Students League was very important in bringing all of these people together. And when I was trying to study about the show and go through the catalog, I made a list of all of the people who had attended, of these people here, the 50 women, who attended the Art Students League. And it turned out to be approximately 2/3 of them. And this is just a fraction of all of the women artists, because I kept thinking of more and more people who will eventually be in this group. And so it was very important to have this central, because the League was here 1906 to 1922. They went away, but a lot of people stayed after that. And then from 1947 to 1979, they were back again. That's when I came. And so, what did I want to say? I came from a family of women. I grew up with 4 generations of women. And I never really thought much about that, because there was my mother and her mother and her mother and her mother. And my mother was an independent sort, but she was forced to be because the war came along when I was born. My father was shipped overseas, so I never got to see him until I was about 2. And so she had to go out and get different jobs, and she became an electrical engineer and designed potentiometers. She didn't want to. She wanted to be an artist. She went to Pratt. My grandmother was a newspaper reporter. She grew up in Colorado, but she was born in the Dakota Territory, where her mother was. And her mother was part of the cavalry that was stationed on an Indian reservation back when it was the territory. So these were the
We
people.
understand you better now, Paula.
So these were all women who were in charge.
Yeah.
So when my father finally came back and they split up and he left and he was employed but it didn't work, he would make dinner and have her drink ready when she got home. So I thought, well, doesn't everybody do that? So the idea of being an independent woman was like, okay, yeah, sure. That's the way it is. So what happened? When I went to the League, I was going to the League in New York, and I found out that I had a scholarship and that it was good in Woodstock. And I said, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So I wound up in Robert Angelak's class, and that was, they sent me my registration card because there's going to be another show about the League in October at the Woodstock School of Art. They sent me my registration card for up here, and it was dated 6/6/66. So when I was in Bob's class, I met Jean Rolson, who was the registrar, and she had trained with Barbara Feit, who was the registrar before her. So right away, you start meeting several generations. And Bob would gather his students around. We'd go out on drawing classes, drawing together after school and so forth. We got to be friends, and he and his wife, Nancy, took me to Monhegan with Jean Rolson in 1966 in September, my first trip to Monhegan, where I got to babysit for little Eric. And my job was to keep him from falling off the rocks.
It's been quite a job.
So Eric grew up to be a wonderful artist, and Alex, the little daughter, who was 2 at the time, Eric was 6, that began this whole thing. So I didn't have any money. So I started working part-time in the office at the League with Jean, and she trained me how to do stuff. Now, when I was younger, my mother always said, don't learn how to type. If you learn how to type, you're going to work in an office. So I wind up working in an office, and I still can't type. And so through the League office, who was teaching Arnold Blanche and Fletcher Martin and Bill Pockner, Bud Plate,
Richard Mayhew.
Mayhew, Bill, I said Pockner, he still teaches at the League now. What's his name? Dorfman. Yeah, he's still teaching in New York, but he was a kid then. And so you meet all these people, and then we would have, Stuart Conness would have these wonderful parties, and it was called Woodstock Residents Associated with the Art Students League. There were hundreds of people who showed up. There were so many paintings that Stuart would hang some of the pictures sideways so they'd fit, and he would serve big bowls of martinis and Manhattans. And for hors d'oeuvres or food, there were Ritz crackers. That's it. Just Ritz crackers.
No wonder we were so much fun back then.
It was so much fun. And so there were the big parties. So you meet people there, and then you meet people, and then I got jobs at the Tinker Street Cinema taking tickets. I got a job at the Art Supply selling stuff and doing things like that, and payroll here, and anyway, whatever you had to do. And then eventually Bob and Jean and a whole bunch of, the League leaves, right? I got to be registrar and was a lifelong friend with Jean Rolson, who that's one of the things that she did. And eventually I moved to High Woods, and we were neighbors, and I was the executrix for her estate. And and she was quite a remarkable woman. I could, how much am I supposed to talk?
You're fine.
I mean, do you want to hear about these
Sure,
people?
we do want to hear.
Okay, Jean, I'll start with Jean. Because she was probably one of the first people I met. And she grew up in Cumberland, Maryland. She was born in 1920. And her father had terrible arthritis, and her mother was very shaky and had nervous breakdown when she was young in high school. And so she was left on her own when she was about 14 or 15. And her mother had to go to the county infirmary, where she stayed for the rest of her life. And so Jean had to go, this is during the Depression, and she had to live in rooming houses and whatever. But before that, her mother was so smart. She gave her a room in this house, and she said, you can do whatever you want in this room. You can paint on the walls, you can paint on the floor, you can draw. So that was how she started out. And so when her mother was in the infirmary, she used to write to her mother once a week and give her all kinds of news, and she started writing once a week. And that's how she started her columns in the Saugerties Post-Star and the Post-Gazette and the Split Rail Fence. And she would write about genealogy, about artists, she became a poet. She did so many different things. And she married a local boy, Bert Rolson, and she worked in the country store in High Woods to get, there's so many things. She went to the League eventually. She had no money, she went on a train. She started talking to the man next to her. He took her home. She only had the clothes she was wearing. This is in he was going to Washington, D.C. after she graduated from high school. And he got her a job. And he got her, the family took care of her until she was on her own. And then she worked at Gallaudet College, and she worked for the government, and she went to Corcoran. And then she was working for the Department of the War, something or other, World War II. And that was right near the Art Students League, so she started studying with Jose de Kreft. And she just loved working with him, and the summer came, and he went to his place in New Hampshire, I think. And she rode her bicycle to New Hampshire to see him. Wow. And I mean, she was the kind of woman who would just do stuff, and she had nothing. And so she met when she was in the Department of War or whatever it was, writing stuff, and she knew that Harvey Fite was teaching at St. Stephen's College, which became Bard. And so she came to work in the office at Bard and was able to start taking classes with him. And they got to be good friends. And he had a cabin at Opus 40, and he and Barbara were living there. And he was taking a sabbatical to go to Colombia, Peru, or someplace to study stone laying. And so he let her stay on the property, and he had this cabin that is now moved, and they use it for postcards and things now, but it used to be at the far end of Opus 40. And so she lived there with a wood stove, and she went to the stream to get her water. And she started working at Wilgus's store. That's where she met Bert, who was head of all of the machinery at Cantine Paper Mill. So it goes on and on. So she started doing all of this. She wrote columns, she painted, she worked at the League, she did lots of different things. And if anybody came, when I was at the Burr House, that's something else, there'd be students who didn't have anything. And they said, gee, I've been really cold, it's really cold up here. And the next day there would be a sweater that she would pick up at the Highwoods Fair or something to give to others. And so she spent her whole life just writing and researching and doing things. And the lifelong friendship with the Fites was very important. They used to go square dancing together.
I think that's a real theme, the relationships. It's so interesting, all the stories, this, two best friends, I mean, your two families, and your mom meeting, Arnold Blanche out in California and ending up here and finding more lifelong friends that I'm sure your parents had, and all the different people who they would meet, they would come, and the big thing is that they all stayed. They often really developed, even though we do have tiny mountains, they did decide that this was the place that they would take down roots, and a lot of it I think must have had to do with the relationships and being so near other creative people that they felt really comfortable, and the town learned to accept them all. because I wanted you to talk a little bit about Nancy, and because she also, I think, grew up here, but she was my librarian at the Woodstock Elementary School, but married to a prominent artist, but an artist in her own right.
Yeah, she was an artist in her own right, and so were her parents, and so was her grandmother. Her parents, Dudley Summers and Pauline.
Nancy Summers.
Nancy Summers, okay, Nancy Summers Angela. Her parents, Dudley Summers and Pauline. Dudley was a very well respected illustrator and portraitist, and he did illustrations for many prominent magazines, including one that I can't remember. I just read about it. Well, anyway, a lot of them. And Pauline was a designer of book plates, and her father had been a book plate designer. Nobody does that anymore, right? Books, anyway. But they knew a lot of people, and they met at the Art Students League between 1906 and 1922. So
the town also gave opportunities. I mean, it's amazing when you read the biographies. Many of these women exhibited in some really fine galleries all over the country. But there were also a lot of opportunities here for them to show their work, and for the townspeople. Many of the local people ended up with just incredible art collections because, that was a great way to pay for your plumbing work or your building.
The plumber and the dentist both had the best art collections.
Because they would barter their work, and it was just really certainly an unusual place, and a place that they all seem to thrive. And obviously,
and
we're
then,
all still here.
yeah, and then my mom choosing to move here, and her sister, she continued, since she did come up here because it was so close to New York City, she immediately got 57th Street Galleries, which for the children in the audience was a very posh gallery strip once upon a time. And so she was very involved in the professional life of the New York City gallery scene from 1945 until she fell ill in 1990. So it was another 45 years, the second chapter of her life when she was, professional and engaged in the New York City art scene while living up here in this charming little town, which is why everybody still comes flooding up here, right?
Yeah, you left. Back. You're back. You had pursued your own art career, right? And
Yeah,
you were
after high school I went to New York City.
I always thought it was so ironic that so many people here, my friends' parents, came out of the city so their children could have a wonderful mountain country. And as soon as their children grew up, they all moved back to the city.
Yeah, well, everybody wants to go see something that they're not familiar with as children, right? So, yes, off into the world I went, and I lived in New York City for 35 years or more, and traveled around Europe and explored the world and all that, which I still continue to do whenever possible. But it's a matter of seeing the world. Whatever the other is what kids want to venture out into. And I always loved both. I loved the duality of the best of the city and the best of the country.
it's curiosity, right?
Well, of course,
Curiosity.
absolutely, yeah.
I think
Artists
Woodstock has a
have-
lot of that. They have Woodstock has a lot of strong opinions and a lot of curiosity. I think that's what keeps our village thriving through
Yeah.
all the ups and downs. But
I just want to mention one thing that I think is so interesting, and sadly, this was an exhibition at the Whitney that opened February of 2020, if we remember what was going on there.
yes,
It was this amazing exhibit of, I think it should just be on the record, because hardly anybody got to see the show because it was COVID the whole time. It was Mexican muralists and their American counterparts. It was this incredible exhibit, and I was just so proud when I went through the show 2 days before New York City and everything else shut down. I was like, wow, there's nobody in the Whitney. This is great. It's like the last minute you could go to New York. But there were 5 of my parents' Woodstock friends who were prominently displayed in this exhibit. It was, see if I can remember them. Well, Phil Guston, of course,
Okay.
but Fletcher Martin, Anton Refugee, who was a big muralist, Marion Greenwood, and one other, but anyway.
On that wall?
Eddie Millman, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Woodstock historian back there prompting us. Yeah, and so, I mean, that was amazing. That, you know, they had, that some of them worked, Eddie Millman worked with Diego Rivera, Fletcher Martin worked with Siqueiros, who was one of the big three Mexicans. I mean, this is astonishing. You know, and these are guys I grew up with. They were at our dinner parties at our house. Everybody's getting drunk and having a great time. And I just knew that they were fun people and fun grown-ups. And then later on, I learned about their resumes. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. And so they, again, it was just, you know, Woodstock being so amazing and being so completely rural and yet so filled with people who have had these amazing life stories. And they come to Woodstock and it's, you know, you don't see that in too many rural areas. It's beautiful and charming, but the culture, it can be.
And if you look through our archives, you'll see that they designed, they really did immerse themselves in the community. I mean, even to the extent of Jane Bromberg, you know, who was at one point president of our, you know, was involved in our Historical Society. I knew her as Tina's mom. You know, she would show up with the cookies and the whatever, but also an incredible artist. You know, they did posters, they became involved in the League of Women Voters, they really were visible. At the library fair, you could be buying your ticket from Lucille Blanche, or and it was just, we have just little pieces in our town story of their, not only their dedication to their work, but to the community. And, you know, worked, John Pike was on our town board. I mean, but the women in particular, a number of years ago, we did a program called Gathering Woodstock Women. And it was really to celebrate women getting the vote. But strangely, Woodstock didn't have a lot of big name suffragettes who spent a lot of time here. But what we noticed is that we had quite generations of very strong women who just really dedicated themselves to their crafts, to their community, to their families. And this room was filled with their stories. And it was people who came could not believe that this little town, you know, what became home, because many of them were not born here, but became home to so many incredible women. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say with Florence, I mean, a lot of what's, if you see through her diaries, is that when she came up here with the Art Student League, was just that she fell in love with the place. She, you know, she would talk about going back to this, you know, after being here for a couple of weeks doing art, you know, it's like the people, the harmony, it was just very freeing. And when she would go back to the city, you know, she lost all spirit, and she would just, you know, kind of really dramatic language. But in one, she talked about, you know, how all summer long she had been without her corset. So it was very freeing to go back. So, but she, you know, coming up here, I think was really kind of like her happy place, and she was back and forth, and you know, and eventually, you know, she stayed here. But like you said, people were talking about the like artist friends, you know, all the parties that were had, you know, I mean, just parties like every day there'd be like, oh, there were, you know, like 2 cocktail parties, and you know, just they were always just at parties, and it's just that's all she, you know. So it's yeah, but I think it really is that people kind of come up here, and even people, you know, nowadays they come up and it's like, you know, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. It's a very unique place, and they just like, you know, I'm going to stay here. So, but.
The parties, I think, were pretty phenomenal. Generationally, pretty.
They were. I just wanted to add one thing about strong female personalities.
Yes.
My mother would certainly be an example of that. She was no shrinking violet, and I guess we saw that at age 8 when she was like, I'm going to be an artist. She was, you know, again, looking back at her history, she was a feminist. She never used that word ever, but a feminist in the 1930s. Those murals she did were in the 1930s. She was wearing blue jeans and cowboy boots, and she and her sister were driving around the United States going to, like, they got a mural, an opportunity to apply for a mural in Oklahoma. They'd get in the car, take their dogs, and drive from Colorado to Oklahoma or Texas or Arkansas, wherever. And, okay, what goes on here? Oh, they're in the fields. Let's do some sketches of what they're doing in the field so we can get a realistic image of what the mural would be like. And so that spirit just, you know, I was born into that. You were talking about that, these amazing women who raise us, and then, you know, environmentalism, feminism were things that were just givens. We didn't have
We
words
didn't have
for
those
them.
words.
No, there was no word. It was much later, like, oh, is that what my mother has been about for the last 35 years? And so the fortunate ones like me, and sounds like Paula, who grew up in that environment, it's like, it never occurred to me that I shouldn't do exactly what I wanted to do with my life.
Exactly,
You know, it
exactly,
was just
that was it.
like, what? Why would you not do what you love with your life? What a gift is that? My God, there's no price on that. And then there were the parties.
Yeah, pretty phenomenal, I must say. Someone once told me that they had come here and they went to a cocktail party, so they assumed they would go in, have a drink, and then they would and go home. But no. I mean, tons of food, lots to drink, and they could go on for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of people from all different walks of life, sharing lots of ideas, and often a lot of music to go with the art.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
that was really sort of fun. I don't know if there's anything else. I don't know if the audience, if people have. I'm sure many of you also know, some of the women from our walls or other artists, or your Woodstock woman or female artist yourself. Any questions that people
I
have?
have a question. Jenny, what's the closest Magaffin mural? Is there,
Well, things are a little time sensitive since, over the many, many decades, things get covered up, or I don't believe any of my mother's murals were destroyed. There was one in Washington, D.C. They did a couple of murals in Washington, D.C., and they were in government buildings. I know one of them became no longer a government building, so the mural's probably on the wall there, but whether anybody can get in to see it or not is another story. So there were two in D.C. There was a later mural that she did much later in her life, Civil War mural in Virginia, Chancellorsville, Virginia, which is still in location, but again, it may have been covered up. And, this is a long time, going on a century, is that possible? Oh my God. So, but as far as I know, most of them are still in varying condition. I saw the one in Denver, which is in beautiful shape because it's a nice dry atmosphere in Colorado, so there's no humidity problems. So closest ones would be DC and Virginia.
The WPA is documenting them.
Yeah,
What's it
the
called?
Living New Deal.
Living New Deal.
Yeah, that's a good organization.
Yes.
Pulling
Interestingly,
together.
we have none in Woodstock.
No.
Yes.
I might ask about Jenny and her work.
Jenny Magaffin?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I saw some stunning work that she had done on like wheat fields, I think it was, a storm or something, just stunning.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, did she have a lot of work that she accomplished before she passed, or?
Yeah, my aunt died very, very young. She died at age 36, which is like boom, out of the blue, which was a huge tragedy because the two girls were, they were just joined at the hip and all that. So she was a very prolific artist, yeah, but she had a very short career. And if her niece ever gets a website together, the world might know about her again. But yeah, she was prolific, and again at that tender age, she managed to get work into. In the old days, like the Guggenheim and the Whitney and the Met Museum would buy work from regular old artists, which I don't know if they do anymore. Seems like they don't. So they have these. It's represented by the Whitney, but. So she has, work somewhere in their vaults.
Okay, so somewhere it exists.
Yeah, I have a few paintings. If you want to buy some, you can get in touch with me.
Wham has some.
Wham has some. Yes.
Yep.
You mentioned Dorfman,
Yes, Bruce Dorfman.
and I think I have one of his wife's paintings. Is that possible?
I
He had
don't
a
know.
couple of wives. Do you know which? Well, people had multiple.
Well, it's a different gender, so I'm not sure if you want to discuss it, but
Yeah,
I'll ask later.
okay.
I don't know that
I don't-
either of them.
I don't know.
know that either of them.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of romance in the Woodstock, because, we're really talking here about long-standing relationships, but there was a lot of movement. Families, sometimes we have to clarify what wife we're talking about, but it was really, we have a little bit up there. We have a little bit, yeah.
I'd like to mention in that regard, there are two pictures there by Nancy Summers and Mara Angela, the two wives of Bob Angela. And they became very, very close to one another. And the last photograph I have of Bob, and I took hundreds of pictures of Bob Angelo, was him holding hands with Nancy, looking at the paintings.
It was
on
at the
wall.
school.
It was about 2 days before he died.
Yeah.
Sweet.
But they would go around Woodstock together, the three of them, and the final years, the end.
Yeah.
And one of the main jobs was,
Oh,
and Bob would go to
the
the
mousetrap.
studio, and they would empty the mousetraps.
Right, yeah, once a week, Mara would take Bob and Nancy up to his studio, because he lived in his studio like 3 days a week, and he lived with Mara 4 days a week, his wife. That's how the marriage lasted a long time, because he could watch football and all that. Anyway, once a week, they'd go up to his studio, and by this time, Nancy was deep into Alzheimer's. And so she would find the mouse traps and point them out, and then he would empty them. And then they would get back in the car, and Mara would drive them off to someplace for shopping. And she would take them to parties and to things that were going on in town. And it was just a lovely relationships among them. But Mara used to talk about writing a book called Under Overlook,
Yeah.
about all of the interrelationships in town,
That'd be a long book.
which is so funny. I mean, so many, like Marg Wetterow up there, that's a portrait she did of her son Robin. And Robin and Mara were born the same year, I think, when was it? I think
1930.
1930, yeah. And so I think they used to date, but Robin dated a lot of different people, and so did Mara. And they were friends. And then, well, Marg is known for doing the map of Woodstock artist houses. And I had dinner there one day, and she gave me one of the maps, so I feel that that was very special. And, but there were these people, it was all these things that Robin was also, he wasn't an artist, he was a musician, right? He played in different bands. There were a lot of, Nancy and, and Mara, I think that was a little silk screen. She was a student at Bob's, at the Art Students League. And then it became, when Bob started the Woodstock School of Art, she was the treasurer and the bookkeeper. And I was the, vice president. We all had a hand in doing a little bit of stuff there. It was a mom and pop school in the very beginning. Because the league left, and there were those beautiful buildings that were done by the NYA, built by them. Thomas Penning designed some of them. And Julia Laycraft had something to do with it, too. And, well, the buildings were abandoned by the league, and Bob felt a very strong need to save them so that they wouldn't be turned into something else. And so he got the townspeople here to try to convince the New York League to come back and not leave. But that was unsuccessful. And because it was unsuccessful, many of the businessmen, lawyers, interested people, supporters got together because there was no money, no money. And one of the attorneys got the not-for-profit status within a very short period of time, and the Woodstock School of Art got the lease. And so that was, 1980. And then we started classes in 81. And so it was the mom and pop school. And when September came and we wanted to go to Monhegan, we would close the school. And then we would go and then come back.
It's a wonderful
Wonderful place.
legacy.
And
Yeah,
they're
we
all
can't do that
creating-
anymore.
They're all creating that next generation of historic Woodstock artists. I want to thank you all for coming. We have a book that Bruce put together if you want to read a little bit more about the different artists. We also have some cookies and something to drink out on the porch. Feel free. We hope you'll stay. If you want to have more questions for any of our guests, that would be great. We hope you come back to future programs here. Bruce will be doing another. He'll be doing another program the last weekend in August. And we have lots more. You can check us up on our website, which is Woodstock.
Historical Society of Woodstock.
.org. I know that part. Okay, thank you very much.